The 1963 film, The Great Escape, is a masterpiece of cinema. It has everything: dashing heroes, clever engineering, a motorcycle chase that never actually happened, and a rousing score that makes tunnel digging seem like the most exciting activity in human history. It's entertaining, inspiring, and almost completely sanitized for your protection. What the movie doesn't tell you is that of the 76 men who escaped through that tunnel on the night of March 24, 1944, only 3 made it to freedom. 73 were recaptured, and 50 of those recaptured men were executed by the Gestapo in what can only be described as premeditated murder dressed up as policy. If you want to hear more untold stories from history that Hollywood got wrong, subscribe and hit the notification bell, because this channel digs deeper than Steve McQueen's motorcycle ever did. This is the story of what really happened after the credits rolled, the names Hollywood left out, the faces that never made it to the screen, the final moments that were too dark, too brutal, too inconveniently real for a movie that needed to sell tickets and inspire audiences. This is the story of the 50 men who escaped into freedom and found execution instead. And it begins, as all great disasters do, with absolutely brilliant planning that runs into absolutely terrible luck. Stalag Luft III was built to be escape-proof. The Germans had learned from previous camps, studied every successful breakout, consulted engineers, and created what they believed was the ultimate prisoner-of-war facility. The barracks were raised on stilts so guards could see underneath. Seismograph microphones were buried around the perimeter to detect digging. The sandy soil was deliberately chosen because it was bright yellow, impossible to hide when you tried to dispose of it. Guard towers every 100 yards, searchlights that turned night into day, German shepherds that turned escape attempts into very short chase scenes. The Germans were proud of this camp. They'd thought of everything, except for one small detail. They'd imprisoned some of the most stubborn, creative, and frankly bored officers in the Allied air forces. Men who had nothing to do all day except think about how to get out. Men who viewed escape-proof the way a toddler views child-proof, as a personal challenge. Squadron leader Roger Bushell, a South African lawyer flying for the RAF, took charge of the escape committee. He was brilliant, charismatic, and possessed the kind of organized mind that could coordinate hundreds of prisoners in a clandestine operation right under German noses. He was also motivated by a very personal grudge. He'd been recaptured after a previous escape and witnessed Gestapo atrocities that convinced him the only way to fight back was to create maximum chaos for the German war effort. His plan was audacious. Not one tunnel, not 2, but 3 simultaneous tunnels, codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. If the Germans found one, the others would continue. It was redundancy planning that would make modern engineers weep with appreciation. 200 prisoners were involved in the operation. They manufactured civilian clothing from dyed uniforms. They forged documents, travel passes, identity cards, letters of transit that would have made the Gestapo's own forgers envious. They created a complete underground railway, electric lights powered by stolen electricity, air pumps made from kit bags, a trolley system to move diggers through 335 feet of tunnel. The engineering was magnificent. The organization was flawless. The German guards suspected nothing. Well, almost nothing. Tom was discovered in September 1943. The Germans were quite pleased with themselves. See? Escape-proof. But Tom was the decoy. Harry continued, dug deeper, went farther, reached beyond the wire and under the forest. By March 1944, it was ready. The escape was scheduled for the night of March 24, 1944. A moonless night, perfect for slipping away into darkness. 200 men were supposed to go. They'd drawn numbers, established an order, prepared their forged documents and civilian disguises. And then Murphy's Law arrived for its scheduled appointment. The first problem: Harry's exit came up short. Instead of emerging in the forest beyond the lights, it came up 15 feet short, right at the edge, still visible to the guard towers. They'd measured wrong, or the maps were wrong, or the tunnel had curved during construction. Regardless, their carefully planned exit was now a highly visible hole in the ground. The escapees had to revise on the fly. They created a signal system, a guard patrolling. Wait, guard gone, run like hell. It slowed everything down. What should have taken minutes, per man now took 5, 10, 15 minutes. The second problem: it was March. In Germany, it was freezing. Men emerged from the warm tunnel into sub-zero temperatures wearing thin civilian disguises. Some had to crawl back to get coats. More delays. The third problem: the tunnel partially collapsed midway through the night, trapping a man underground and requiring precious time to dig him out. By now, the schedule was completely destroyed. Instead of 200 men, maybe 80 would make it through before dawn. They kept going. What else could they do? They'd spent a year digging this tunnel. Some men had spent months in solitary confinement as punishment for previous escape attempts. They'd come too far to quit because of a little thing like their tunnel being in the wrong place and partly collapsed in sub-zero weather. By 4:55 a.m., 76 men had made it out. The 77th man was crawling through the tunnel when a German guard literally stumbled over the exit hole while patrolling. He probably spent the next several minutes questioning his life choices while staring into a hole that shouldn't exist, wondering how long it had been there and calculating how much paperwork this was going to generate. The alarm was raised. The camp went into lockdown. Operation Grossfahndung, the Great Manhunt, began immediately. Within hours, the entire German military and police apparatus in the region was mobilized. Roadblocks, train station surveillance, ID checks, radio alerts. The largest prisoner of war manhunt in German history was underway. The Germans were not amused. Someone was going to answer for this embarrassment, preferably the escapees. Failing that, the camp guards. Possibly both. Of the 76 men who escaped, their destinations varied. Some headed for the Baltic coast, hoping to stow away on Swedish ships. Others aimed for Switzerland or France. A few optimists thought they could walk to England, which showed either remarkable determination or a fundamental misunderstanding of geography and the English Channel. Most were recaptured within hours. Some made it days. 3, just 3, actually made it to freedom. Flight Lieutenant Bram van der Stok, a Dutch pilot, made it to Spain via France and then to Gibraltar. He would later rejoin the RAF and continue flying operations. He survived the war, lived to old age, and spent decades telling people, "Yes, I was actually in that movie," sort of, except they combined my escape with 2 other guys and gave us different nationalities. Flight Lieutenant Jens Müller and Flight Lieutenant Per Bergsland, both Norwegian pilots, made it to Sweden by train, ferry, and considerable nerve. They simply walked through Germany pretending to be foreign workers, boarded a train to the coast, caught a ferry to Sweden, and presented themselves to the Allied embassy in Stockholm. It was the most successful escape of the entire operation, and also possibly the most boring. No shootouts, no dramatic chases, just 2 Norwegians calmly travelling through Nazi Germany like they owned the place. Which, given how many Norwegians were fluent in German and could pass for ethnic Germans, was actually decent planning. Everyone else was caught, usually quickly, usually anticlimactically, usually by diligent policemen checking papers at train stations or by farmers noticing men in ill-fitting civilian clothes walking through fields where they had no business being. And this is where the story gets dark. Because being recaptured as an escaped POW wasn't supposed to be a death sentence. The Geneva Convention was quite clear. Escape attempts were expected. Recaptured prisoners would face punishment, solitary confinement, reduced rations, loss of privileges, but not execution. Hitler had other ideas. Before we continue with what happened next, and trust me, you need to hear this, take a second to like this video. It helps more people discover the real stories behind the Hollywood versions. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? When Hitler learned about the Great Escape, he was furious. Not the theatrical fury of a movie villain, the cold, calculating fury of a dictator who saw this as a personal insult and a propaganda disaster. 76 Allied officers had dug a tunnel under his escape-proof camp and waltzed out. The German military had been made to look incompetent. The Luftwaffe, which ran the POW camps, had been humiliated. And Hitler, who by March 1944 was dealing with collapsing fronts in the east and west, impending invasion in France, and the general sense that Germany was losing the war, decided that someone needed to pay. His initial order: execute them all. Every single recaptured escapee. Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, objected. Not out of humanitarian concern, let's not give him too much credit, but because executing POWs would violate the Geneva Convention, might lead to reprisals against German POWs, and would definitely cause problems with the Luftwaffe's reputation for running honourable camps. After consultation with various high-ranking Nazis who'd gathered for what must have been an absolutely delightful meeting, they arrived at a compromise: execute more than half. That way, it would be clear this was retaliation, would terrorise other prisoners into not attempting escapes, but wouldn't be quite as blatantly illegal as executing all of them. 50 seemed like a good number. Nice and round. More than half of 73 recaptured men. Enough to make a point. Hitler approved. The order went out to the Gestapo. Select 50 prisoners for Sonderbehandlung, special treatment, which sounds bureaucratic and boring until you realise special treatment was Nazi euphemism for execution. The selection process was arbitrary. Some senior officers were spared because killing them might cause bigger international incidents. Some men were randomly selected because they happened to be in the wrong cell when Gestapo came calling. There was no trial, no formal charges, no legal process whatsoever. Just a list of 50 names marked for death. And then the Gestapo got creative with their paperwork, because even mass murder required proper documentation in Nazi Germany. The official story: all 50 men were shot while attempting to escape custody during transport back to Stalag Luft III. They'd overpowered guards, made a run for it, forced the Gestapo to open fire in self-defense. Tragic, really. Completely unavoidable. The reality: cold-blooded murder disguised as procedure. The pattern was consistent. Prisoners would be told they were being transferred to another camp. They'd be loaded into vehicles, usually in small groups of 2 or 3. They'd be driven to secluded locations, forest roads, empty fields, isolated stretches of highway. They'd be ordered out for a bathroom break or a cigarette, and then they'd be shot in the back. Sometimes the Gestapo officers would shout, "Halt!" before firing, to make it sound like an escape attempt. Sometimes they didn't bother with the theatre. Sometimes the prisoners were already in handcuffs when they were shot, which made the escape attempt story particularly creative fiction. One group was taken to a crematorium and shot in the furnace room. Efficient, if nothing else. The Germans did like their efficiency. The executions took place over several days in March and April 1944. 50 men, 50 separate murders, 50 families that would receive notifications saying their son, husband, father had been shot while trying to escape. Let me give you some names, because they deserve more than being statistics. Squadron leader Roger Bushell, the mastermind. Shot on March 29th near Saarbrücken with Flight Lieutenant Bernard Scheidhauer. Both had made it within miles of the French border. So close. The Gestapo officer who killed them probably got a commendation. Flight Lieutenant Reginald Kierath, Australian pilot, 24 years old, shot April 6th. His mother received a telegram saying he'd died attempting to escape. The telegram was a lie. Squadron leader James Catanack, another Australian, 30 years old, shot March 31st. His last words were reportedly asking if he could write a letter to his wife. He was told no, then shot. Flight Lieutenant Dennis Street, British pilot, shot April 1st, 24 years old, had survived being shot down over Germany, had survived being a POW, had survived the escape, didn't survive the Gestapo. Flight Lieutenant Cyril Swain, shot March 31st with Flight Lieutenant Gordon Kidder. Both were Canadian. Both were found with bullets in their backs despite official reports saying they were shot while running away. Ballistics. Inconvenient for the official narrative. Squadron leader Ian Cross, British pilot, shot April 6th. He was 38 years old, elderly by RAF standards, married with children, executed in a forest and cremated immediately. His ashes were sent to his widow with a note expressing the Gestapo's regrets. All 50 faces that never made it into the Steve McQueen movie. All 50 men escaped one prison only to meet execution squads in another. But you get the point. These weren't abstractions. These weren't casualties of war dying in combat. These were prisoners of war, entitled to protection under international law, murdered by men following orders from the highest levels of Nazi government. And when the remaining prisoners at Stalag Luft III were informed of the deaths, when the camp commandant had to stand before them and read the list of 50 names, the camp went silent. Because everyone knew, everyone understood. This wasn't procedure. This was murder. And there wasn't a damn thing they could do about it. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, one of the first priorities for Allied war crimes investigators was tracking down the perpetrators of the Great Escape murders. The British government, in particular, was determined. You don't execute 50 RAF officers and expect it to be forgotten just because the war's over. They created a special investigation unit. They tracked down Gestapo officers. They found the guards who'd pulled the triggers. They located the bureaucrats who'd transmitted the orders. They interviewed witnesses, recovered bodies, and examined forensic evidence. The investigation lasted years. They were thorough, methodical, relentless. By the time it was over, they'd identified and prosecuted 21 Gestapo officers and officials directly involved in the murders. 13 were hanged. Others received lengthy prison sentences. A few escaped, fled to South America, or disappeared into the chaos of post-war Europe. But most were caught. Justice was served, more or less, though justice feels inadequate when 50 men are already dead. The 3 escapees who'd made it to freedom, van der Stock, Müller, and Bergsland, survived the war. They testified at the trials. They carried the memories of their 73 fellow escapees for the rest of their lives. The survivors who'd been left behind in Stalag Luft III, those who hadn't made it out before the alarm, who'd spent the rest of the war as prisoners, they remembered too. Every day. Every roll call where 50 names were no longer called. And Hollywood made a movie about it. A great movie. An entertaining movie. A movie that turned tragedy into adventure. That made escape tunnels look exciting. That gave Steve McQueen a motorcycle chase that never happened. That let most of the characters live because audiences don't like downer endings. The movie ended with the escape, with men running for freedom, with hope and determination, and the sense that these brave men might actually make it. The reality ended with 50 unmarked graves, 50 families receiving lies disguised as official notifications, and 50 murders that were briefly investigated, half-heartedly prosecuted, and largely forgotten by everyone except the men who survived to tell the story. 12 months to dig the tunnel. 10,000 bedboards stolen for shoring. 200 prisoners were involved in the operation. 600 forged documents created. 250 feet of tunnel length. 76 men escaped. 73 recaptured. 50 murdered. 3 made it to freedom. That's a 4% success rate if we're measuring success by didn't get shot by the Gestapo, if we're measuring by caused maximum disruption to the German war effort, which was partly the point. The numbers look better. The manhunt involved thousands of German soldiers, policemen, and officials who could have been doing something productive for the war effort instead of searching for escaped RAF officers. Tens of thousands of man-hours were spent tracking down men who were ultimately just trying to get home. Resources diverted from actual military operations to pursue prisoners who, even if they'd all made it to England, wouldn't have significantly impacted the war. So in one sense, the escape succeeded. It tied up German resources. It embarrassed the Luftwaffe. It proved that even in an escape-proof camp, determined men could dig a third of a football field under barbed wire and guard towers. But 50 men died, and that's a hell of a price for embarrassing the Luftwaffe. If this story matters to you, if you think these 50 names deserve to be remembered, share this video. Send it to someone who thinks they know the Great Escape story, because they probably don't, not the real one. The 1963 film, The Great Escape, is brilliant entertainment. James Garner scrounging supplies, Richard Attenborough coordinating the operation, Charles Bronson, claustrophobic but digging anyway, Gordon Jackson, the Scottish officer whose accent gives him away at a checkpoint, Donald Pleasance as the forger going blind from close work, and of course, Steve McQueen on a motorcycle. Because Hollywood decided what this story of British and Commonwealth RAF officers really needed was an American on a motorcycle outrunning Germans in scenes that never happened. The movie ends with most escapees recaptured, but alive. A few make it to freedom. It's bittersweet, but hopeful. The final title card mentions that some men were shot, but it's vague, brief, not dwelling on uncomfortable details that might harsh the audience's buzz. What the movie doesn't show. Roger Bushell, the actual mastermind, being executed on a roadside near Saarbrücken. His body was cremated immediately. His ashes were sent to his mother in South Africa with a note saying he died while attempting to escape. She knew it was a lie. Everyone knew. The 6 Poles who escaped, all shot. Poland had been occupied, brutalized. Its people slaughtered by the millions. These 6 Polish RAF officers had escaped occupied Poland, made it to England, trained as pilots, been shot down over Germany, imprisoned, escaped from that prison, only to be murdered by the same regime that had destroyed their country. The irony was so dark, it approached parody. The Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians, Brits, South Africans, men from across the Commonwealth united by RAF service, scattered across Germany and executed in forests, fields, and back roads. Their bodies disposed of, their murders disguised as justified shootings, their deaths used to terrorize the prisoners who remained. The movie doesn't show the camp commandant reading the list of 50 names to assembled prisoners, doesn't show the moment when men realized that half their friends were dead, doesn't show the silence that followed, the rage, the helplessness, because that doesn't make for entertaining cinema. In the end, The Great Escape became a legend, a story of courage, ingenuity, and determination against impossible odds. It inspired books, films, documentaries. It became shorthand for daring escape, the standard by which all other escapes are measured. But 50 men didn't become legends. They became statistics. Names on a memorial at Stalag Luft III. Graves in a German cemetery. Files in a war crimes tribunal. Squadron leader Roger Bushell never saw his plan succeed. He died within miles of freedom, shot by a Gestapo officer who was later hanged for murder, but only after the war ended, after it was too late to matter. The three who made it, van der Stock, Müller, Bergsland, carried their survival like a weight. They'd made it. 50 of their fellow escapees hadn't. That's not survivor's guilt, exactly. That's the burden of being the exception, of living while others died for attempting the exact same thing. The remaining prisoners at Stalag Luft III stopped digging tunnels. Not because they were broken, not because they'd given up, but because the math had changed. The risk-reward calculation now included the Gestapo might just shoot you, which significantly altered the equation. The camp was eventually evacuated as Soviet forces approached in early 1945. The prisoners were marched west through winter conditions that killed several more men. Not dramatically, not in combat, just cold and exhaustion and malnutrition. Even at the end, even when Germany was clearly losing, the dying continued. And when it was over, when the war ended, when the tribunals convicted the murderers, when the graves were marked and the memorials built and the books written and the movies made, even then the question remained, was it worth it? 3 men made it to freedom. 50 were murdered. The operation embarrassed Germany, disrupted resources, and proved escape was possible even from escape-proof camps. But 50 men died. Roger Bushell, when planning the escape, knew the risks. He'd seen what the Gestapo was capable of. He'd witnessed atrocities during previous recaptures. He knew this escape might end badly. He did it anyway, because staying in a cage while the world burned seemed worse than trying and failing. Because resistance, even futile resistance, mattered. Because doing something was better than doing nothing. Whether he was right is a question for philosophers and historians. The 50 men who died can't answer. The 3 who made it probably have complicated feelings about it. The men who survived the war and lived into old age, who told their stories to children and grandchildren, who visited the memorial at Stalag Luft III and stood before the names of the 50. They probably wondered too. Was it worth it? I don't know. I'm just telling you what happened. 76 men crawled through a tunnel toward freedom. 3 made it. 50 were murdered. 23 survived to be liberated when the war ended. Steve McQueen's movie left out the worst part. Because the worst part isn't entertainment. It's just history. Dark, ugly, uncomfortable history that reminds us that war isn't adventure. Heroism isn't always rewarded. And sometimes the good guys die for no reason except that evil men with guns decided they should. The Great Escape succeeded in embarrassing Nazi Germany. It failed in getting most men to safety. It resulted in one of the most clear-cut war crimes of the European theatre. And it's remembered as a triumph, because that's how we prefer our history. Sanitized, heroic, meaningful. We want the sacrifice to have been worth it. We want the deaths to have meant something. We want to believe that brave men who tried impossible things ultimately won, even if they died in the attempt. Sometimes they did win. Sometimes their sacrifice changed the course of history. And sometimes 50 men were shot in the back on German back roads and cremated before their families could be notified. Both things are true. History contains multitudes, including the parts we'd rather not think about. The Great Escape happened. It was brilliant. It was tragic. It was heroic. It was pointless. It was all of these things at once, because real events are complicated and don't fit neatly into narrative boxes. 76 men escaped. Most didn't make it. 50 died badly. 3 made it home. And Hollywood made a movie that left out the worst part. Now, you know the part they left out. If you want to keep learning the real stories behind history's greatest myths, legends, and Hollywood dramatizations, subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. And let me know in the comments. What historical event do you think Hollywood got completely wrong? I'll see you in the next one.